This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Before we get to today's program, I just wanted to mention that Theory of Change is part of the Flux Media Network, so go to flux.community for more podcasts and articles about politics, culture, media, and technology, and how they all intersect. And if you want to go directly to this program's archives, just go to theoryofchange.show. You can get the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And we do have Patreon and Substack subscriptions if you are able to support financially. Thank you very much. And we do have free subscriptions as well if you can't afford to right now. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the like and subscribe button so you can get notified when we post new episodes. Thanks a lot. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get to today's program. The 2024 presidential election is over, and Donald Trump is returning to the White House once again. His victory is a triumph of political ecosystems and how much bigger the right has been in the United States than the left, at creating multiple systems to funnel people into their party system. But while Trump's victory is a triumph for the right-wing political ecosystem, it took place within a larger political environment that we haven't talked about yet on this program. And there are, unfortunately for Democrats and the left, a lot of larger underlying issues that have made many Americans unsatisfied with the way things are in our current society. And instead of realizing that and doing something about it, rhetorically and in terms of policy, many Democrats have not responded to the disaffection that many Americans have. For a long time, most Americans have felt that the country's best days are behind it, and also felt like their personal financial circumstances are worse than they were in the past. Now, some of this is the product of right-wing indoctrination and propaganda when a Democrat is the president, but it is more than that. And it's an interesting and important fact to note that in her loss to Donald Trump, Kamala Harris got about 6 or 7 million fewer votes than Joe Biden did, whereas Donald Trump got about the same exact number of votes that he did in 2020. So in many ways, the election was decided by people who stayed home. And then there also is another interesting and important data point, which is that Donald Trump won among new voters, people who had never voted before. And we're going to talk about all of this and a lot more today with our guest, Maura Ugarte. She is a filmmaker and professor of film at George Mason University. She's also the co-producer of a 2008 film called Divide, which we will discuss among many other subjects in the episode. And joining me now is Maura Ugarte.
Hi,
hey,
thank
Maura.
you for having me, even though I still feel like it's under stressful circumstances. So.
Yes. And, you know, so with the podcast and my writing at Flux, I've been trying to focus on the idea of ecosystems a lot in the response to the election outcome. And but one thing I want to make clear that it's easy to say, and it is absolutely true, that right-wing media was a huge part of why Donald Trump won. And also, you know, some people's thoughts about the economy are a huge part as well. Now, whether that was because of propaganda, that's another thing. But it's a mistake. It's overly simplistic to think that it was just only those two things, or, you know, her failure to, you know, do this or that smaller thing. There are some other bigger dynamics and one of them is that besides the fact that Democrats don't talk to the public, they also don't listen to the public or know what to say, even if they were talking.
Yeah, you know, it's funny though, like in some ways, I felt like Harris was responding to political consultants who were telling her to message in a particular kind of way, which wasn't actually listening either. But that, like, it was just sort of this very sort of bulleted point. If I talk about this and that and the other thing, and not talk about this, that, and the other thing, then it's a winning message.
And you've been kind of thinking about how Democrats could listen and speak better irrespective of platforms, to the public for a while. So with the film that you co-produced, well, let's talk about that just a little bit before we get further into this.
Sure. So Divide, it's funny because the thing came out in like 2012, but it seems to, and it's short, it's like 21 minutes long, and it seems to, unfortunately, be politically relevant. It was about a retired white coal miner in McDowell County, West Virginia, which is right at the southern, it's right in the most southern county of West Virginia. It is one of the poorest counties in all of West Virginia. And this man was organizing for Barack Obama.
If we don't do something in this country, the middle class will be eliminated. There'll be two types of people again. There'll be the rich and the poor, which it's going that way real quick now, the way I see it.
This whole thing is the biggest fairy tale I've ever seen.
Senator Obama's support among hardworking Americans, white Americans, is weakening again.
It's a challenge to try to elect a black man that's named Barack Obama. It is. It's a challenge.
2 out of 10 West Virginia white voters said that race was a factor. These are Democrats, white working class Democrats, who say in a general election, we're not going to go for you.
If we're not careful, we're going to be in the back of the bus and they're going to be in the front.
Divide and conquer is, of course, that's an old saying, I know, and everybody's heard it, but there's a whole lot of truth in that.
And the film, we can talk about how the film came about, which I think is actually kind of important, but the film just sort of tracks his organizing efforts, the media, the mainstream media messages, both from the right wing and also a little bit from liberal media, mainstream media, and then also integrating that with the labor history of the area. And try to tell this broader story of why we're seeing what we're seeing, and the sort of mechanisms of that. I think that's what is continuing to be relevant. And I have that, I've unfortunately encountered a lot of liberals who have very retrograde ideas of what it means to be from West Virginia or from Appalachia, to be a white working class person, I think.
Yeah. Well, and that's, ironically, that is those, haughty perspectives and opinions, that was actually what powered the success of JD Vance's Hillbilly Elegy book, because that book, it was marketed as being, well, this is an explanation of why these people did this, but actually what it was just this protracted harangue against, these dumb idiots. They've thrown their lives away on drugs and they're lazy and they won't move away. They should just leave. But instead they want to stay home and be on drugs.
And that's
why they voted for Trump.
No, it's not true at all.
Which is
number
not
one.
True
but
at
number
all.
two, I would remind everyone, I was given this book by several people at the time, people that I loved, people that I cared about, liberals, right? Left, people of the left, even people to the left of liberals were giving me this book. He was a darling of, like, it was on the New York Times bestseller list. And if you read it, I only made it a partial way through, to be honest. But he's basically blaming white working class people. He's blaming them for their situation, and basically saying the reason why you can't give welfare to these folks is because they will spend it on drugs. He doesn't mention the Sacklers. He doesn't mention any kind of structural problems, right? But he was a way for people to somehow understand the Tea Party. It's a bit absurd.
It was, yeah, but it fit, his narrative fit very nicely into the neoliberal conception of what being working class in America. And like the other thing also is that the people who were touting this book, most of whom I assume never read it, but if they had, they clearly didn't understand what the point of it was. And but from the other, it also perpetuated another problem that really pervades a lot of elite left discourse about people who are blue collar, is that they racialize so much of it. And what this election in 2024 really showed is that all these issues are not racial in a lot of ways. So Donald Trump won Latino men for the first time. A Republican had done that in a very, very long time, and did very well with Latino women, and got higher margins among black men, and interestingly enough, did not do any better among white men. So
I did not know that.
Was, and you can say, well, maybe he's maxed himself out there, but what that shows is that he actually, he gained some support from these new voters, but he also lost a lot of white male supporters. But it didn't matter because
this ties back into the reason why Michael Miller, the co-director of the film, we decided to make the film, was that during the Dem primary in 2008, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and their surrogates were saying that the reason why you have to vote for Hillary Clinton was because white working class people would never vote for a black man, which is an inherently racist argument. And and also working class people are not all, it's a big, diverse group. And it, what we felt, we were watching was a whole bunch, once Obama won the primary, it felt like mainstream senior news editors were sending reporters specifically to Appalachia, but also very, very much to West Virginia, because it has such a tradition of being blue, to find the white Dem voter who'd voted Dem for all of their entire lives, who wouldn't vote for Barack Obama because he's a black man, as if all of the racists who are low information and vote against their own interests are located in this one particular state. And that is so upsetting and so offensive, and and I think that thinking is partly why we find ourselves where we find ourselves. I should have mentioned prior about McDowell County, West Virginia, is that unlike the rest of West Virginia, it has a 16, at least at the time when we were there, I don't know what it's looking like quite now, but 16 to 17% of the population of McDowell County was African American, for coal mining reasons, for very specific reasons. And now it went, they voted for Barack Obama in 2008. And now it is not only blush red, it is quite red now, that county.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing about this, though, is that, with the presidency of Joe Biden, I think we have to say that it is true that he, did put in a lot of progressive policies. But those policies and this is where media was a factor, but it wasn't only media. It's that, so these policies that he put in, a lot of people don't know that they happened. Either they haven't gone into effect, or, Biden as the president did the fewest number of press conferences of any recent president by far. So he wasn't out there, telling people, this is what I have done for you. This is what I did. And Harris didn't really do that either. And so to a large extent, it was like they expected, and I kept seeing all these complaints about, well, the mainstream media, they won't report all these things that Biden did. And it's like, well, at the very least, she should be saying, you're going to expect them to do her work for her?
No, and the messages,
right.
like they were, I don't know, they were like asking people, like, what messages are they going to respond to, what they're not going to respond to. And clearly, whomever they're paying millions of dollars were wrong, right? And I, personally am quite frustrated, and probably will be to the end of my days, that that the Clintons in 2016 and Hillary and that whole establishment around forced her through, because I counterfactuals, whatever, but like I'm relatively certain that Biden would have won easily based on the same, with the same kind of policy stuff that he was talking about in 2020. Yep.
Yeah, I think so. And it definitely would have been better from an energy level. But, the other thing also, though, is that, it was like they really did believe that policies speak for themselves. And so, like, there was this idea, and people started calling it deliverism or deliveryism. The idea that if we deliver policies that are good and helpful to people, they will appreciate that and they will vote for Democrats.
It's so funny, especially because of 2016, right? It's very frustrating. That the denial, like that simply because they will receive votes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it is. It's very, frankly, astonishingly naive that people who call themselves political professionals would advance these beliefs, quite frankly. And, and I just to look at the numbers here. So, I think Democrats haven't figured out that a lot of people are not paying a lot of attention to politics. And it makes sense that people decide things on what they see. And so if you're not there speaking up for yourself, then why would they, make up your justifications for themselves? They're not going to do that. And that's especially true with younger people and newer voters. And just looking at the exit poll data, so of the 8% of people who said that this was the first year they had ever voted, Trump won 56% of them, and Harris won only 43%. So that, you could argue, that was the election right there. They were new to the system, and Democrats were not there for them in one way or the other. And then, of course, now we're going to have to. The biggest wild card, of course, in the election is that not all the votes are counted at this juncture, but about 7 million people who voted for Biden did not vote at all, and Trump got about the same margin that vote total that he had last time. And so the question is, why? What's on the minds of those people who stayed home? We don't know that yet, but we definitely need to know. But if I had to guess, I would say that this was a huge record turnout in 2020. And a lot of that was probably people who were just really mad at how messed up things were under Trump, and they were coming out to be against him. But notably, Trump himself also, it massively increased his total from 2016 and 2020. And then he kept it. So he had badly messed up in 2020 and in his presidency. The number one task that he was assigned, by fate to accomplish was to handle the pandemic, and because of his incompetence, hundreds of thousands of people died, and the economy was destroyed because of him. And so he failed at that, and that did probably is what motivated these people to come out and show up against him. But then come 2024, he had riled up a lot of people to come and support him anyway, despite how bad things were. And they kept out there to continue to support. Like, that is a power of the right-wing ecosystem, that he had messed up so badly as president, and then, was a traitor to the country, the only president in history to resist, leaving the office.
Yes.
And he still was able to get people to come out and show up for him. And then, whereas Democrats couldn't do it. And they kept running on the protect democracy, Trump's a fascist. And look, that's all true. All that stuff's right. But that's not something that is going to resonate with a lot of people. I think that's
I think I have a variety of thoughts here. I don't have a polling background like you do, so I make films. I talk to people. I'm a professor. I talk to people. But so take this for what it is. But I think a lot of folks who voted for Trump understood kind of the general shape of who he was and were disgusted by him, but did it anyway. And then there were a lot of people who just didn't, who just was like, whatever, I'm not going to vote. And those two categories are gettable voters, and they are both doing a disruption vote. And, I've been banging this drum for so long. The liberal establishment seems to be quite hubristic. Like, you do need to deliver on the things that you're saying that you're going to do. And while Biden did to a certain extent and did not message enough around those things, you still have huge problems, like poverty, like inner city poverty, like places like in DC or in the areas that I live, like Philadelphia, like all these, like people are really suffering. In rural areas, people are really suffering. And you really do need to deliver some kind of message that you are going to do something. But the problem is, like, okay, they voted Obama in. It wasn't tactile enough. It wasn't enough.
Yeah, well, and especially with inflation, like Democrats did not understand how to respond to that. Like so inflation started going up globally after the pandemic as supply chains restarted, and there was some profiteering and greed as well. And then actually there also was that Donald Trump had explicitly raised gas prices actually right before he left office. But Democrats didn't tell anybody that this happened, that he had done that. Like, that's what they should have. Like, he did it actually before the election, that he signed a deal with Saudi Arabia to raise gas prices. Like, to me, that's something that everyone should have known about. But they didn't. And then, but then, irrespective of that, once inflation did start happening, going up, they didn't talk about it. Like, I looked in the White House press archives of the Biden administration, and they almost never talked about it in the early months of it going up. And then, they took so long, and it's not all their fault, because obviously Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema were there ruining things. But, at the very least, if people are ruining things for you, then you should be talking to the public about how these people are causing problems for you, and they're doing this to you, not me. They're doing this. But yeah, so it took like almost a year, just short of a year of them to get the Inflation Reduction Act out the door.
Yes.
And they lost all that time. And with that, and then after inflation started to go down, and again, Biden deserves credit for that. A lot of the policies that were in the bill were, inflation reduction, like forcing drug companies to take less money for their products, things like that. So when it started going down, they didn't, let people know that happened. But then at the same time also didn't understand that people still felt the pain of it. because even if the prices weren't going up as high as quickly, they were still a lot higher than
I
they
think
were
there's
before
also
that.
too, like, just a trust thing. Like there's, we were talking about, like, there's a vaudevillian aspect to Trump, and that clownishness. Like, the Dems have also been clownish. They have not. They talk in one way, and then things don't end up happening in the way that they're talking. Like, one of the things that was really important to understand about 2008 was the election, was the Iraq War, and that is still an under discussed issue, particularly in working class communities and particularly in working class rural communities, where you were sold this idea, and it was an utter disaster. People lied to you left and right, and a lot of folks just see the system as rigged. So voting for Trump, or just simply not voting, I think that's partly how you account for a Obama-Trump voter. It's also how you account for the kind of split tickets that you're seeing in 2024. People just simply don't trust, and I think that is a completely reasonable thing to feel.
Yeah, well, because I mean, a lot of the people in power did lie to them, or if they weren't, let's say you don't want to accuse them of lying. At the very least, they were so terribly incompetent that they, made it hard for people to trust them. There's this narrative that really has taken hold of a lot of people that, the public health authorities, they were wrong about everything. They lied about everything. They were, tyrants. These things are not true because, they were explicitly saying all along the way, look, we don't, know what this virus is. We don't know what it's going to do. So we're putting these precautions in here as a matter of, just because it could be a lot worse and we don't know. And also it was Trump who did these things, not Joe Biden. That's something that the Trump supporters just kind of casually threw out and pretend wasn't there. But they've been very good at creating this story of the pandemic that is favorable to their ideology, and there is no counter story to that that is more factual based from the other side. At least I haven't seen it. Have you?
No, and there should be, in the sense that, like, the some aspects of the institutions did fail us. And even, like, the mistrust there, that is a failure of our liberal democracy, right? I have no particular interventions other than listening, actually, when communities are telling people what the issues are. I think that is something that apparently the Dem establishment is incapable of doing.
They seem to be, the paradox is that the Democrats aspire to be the party of the people, but they actually never listen to the people and have no idea what they're saying. And the only real method of them trying to know or pay attention is through polling or focus groups. And I say this as somebody who is a former pollster myself, that there are severe restrictions on what you can know from the public through polling, even if all your methods are sound and your sample group is reliable. It's a formal setting, and you're asking people to understand a question the way that you have worded it, and expecting that they will understand it the same way. In many cases, these are just multiple choice answers, and maybe somebody has a different answer for what this question would be. and then the focus groups are also problematic as well, because it's just so easy to skew these focus groups, because a lot of times people are just going to sit there and echo whatever the loudest person in the room says, or the person who can talk the most says.
Democrats really seem to lack imagination, right? The policy platforms of the Democratic Party should be aspirational. We need to have not poll-driven platforms. We actually need to be able to shape, to have an imagination, to shape a politics that is broadly focused on liberation. That I think is what we should be doing, and having polling, just as you said, like where you're not really quite able to extricate bias from the way that you're asking the questions and who you're asking them from. Like that stuff, of course, is important, but it shouldn't be in the driver's seat. We should be able to build a politics.
Well, and you're expecting also people to understand how to articulate what it is that they're thinking. Like that can be extremely problematic, because and that's why I think that talk radio and podcasts, besides being really great for propaganda purposes of disseminating the right-wing messages, they're also very good at helping them understand what the audience wants, what motivates people, and what they're thinking about. So whether that's people calling in and saying what's on their mind, or just simply them elevating particular hosts or creators who are talking about certain issues. So maybe they can't articulate what their beliefs are about something, but they really like this one guy who he tells it like it is about these 4 or 5 things, and those are real. Much more reliable barometers of opinion.
Yeah, I also think. I also think though, like a figure like Bernie Sanders in 2016 was able to focus energy. Was like able to focus people's discontent. Was able to focus it into a real political movement, and. I guess we're hoping for someone to rise to the top now, but it seems to me after this last election, no Superman is coming to save us.
Doesn't seem likely now at this point. And like with Sanders, though, typically in the past, when a politician had come along and kind of created a new movement, usually what the parties had done in the past was to say, okay, well, I'm going to identify what the things were that person was talking about. Then we're going to take them over those issues and incorporate them into our thing, or their way of talking about things. So like Ross Perot is a great example of that. The Republicans hadn't talked about, national debt or trade. And Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, actually kind of absorbed a lot of the Perot message. And the bluster and the showmanship. It was right there in front of us that you could see that a lot of people wanted this, straight talking billionaire who tells it like it is and wants to keep the foreigners out. That was a thing there. And, and you can't just, the problem that Democrats have, and there was a great piece that we've been talking about amongst ourselves about how there's this, economic way of thinking, and it's sort of almost completely paralyzed democratic establishment. It's a manifestation of neoliberalism largely. This idea that everything is about economics, and you have a personal familial background to this topic here because the unpleasant reality is that fascism has a very effective critique of capitalism. And you have seen that.
Yeah. So,
relatives have seen
and I also, just to contextualize some of the other things that we've been talking about, I also have a personal relationship with West Virginia, and I also grew up in mid-Missouri, so I have these rural roots. But my grandparents are what I would describe as self-exiles from the Spanish Civil War. My great-grandfather was a governor in the Second Republic, so Spain has a very short history of democracy. This has been its longest run, which is about 45 years or so. And my great-grandfather was death marched across parts of Spain, and my beloved granduncle spent a significant part of his life in exile. And my grandparents suffered pretty significant mental health challenges, and that stuff kind of all rolls downhill. So for me, the stakes feel particularly high. But if you look at Spain, you did have an extremely polarized society. You can't have Dear Leader without a huge portion of the citizenry that support it, and this is quite dangerous. It's very dangerous, and I'm not trying to be histrionic here I'm not saying that that's what we're about to face here. I just think that the stakes are high.
Mm-hmm. Well, they are, and and the critique though of fascism, of capitalism, what it does is it's very eager and willing to point out how
yes.
Some people are economically left behind, but it also does fit to kind of the more emotional and psychological.
Yes, Vance does this quite well
with capitalism as well. He does, yeah, and and it's absolutely the case. Economics is not a way of living. We are not economic beings as humans. We are much more than that. And if you have a party that only can speak in economic terms and only thinks in economic terms about efficiency and about, maximizing benefits and utilitarianism, that's just crap to a lot of people. And I love talking about those things, but this is the reality that we live in, and we're seeing, the commodification,
yes.
for instance, of dating, through that, it used to be, it was a very organic thing that people met people through their friends or through community associations or, groups or, religious organizations, whatever it is. It was very localized. It was non-commercialized. And it worked pretty well for a lot of people. And now dating
yes.
has been completely centralized, corporatized, and
yes.
it's just
yes.
disgusting.
And just one area. I mean,
and this is just one area.
Like I said, I think Vance actually talks about these kinds of issues quite well. And he talks about what you're going to give away your humanity for some plastic stuff from Amazon, right? But then his, of course, answer is blood and soil. That is how you just scapegoat a group of people who have no power and march forward. No matter the consequences to certain categories of people's lives, they're fine to be eradicated. I was listening to this interview with this guy who leads the Manhattan Institute or some right-wing think tank. But he gets published in, big mainstream publications, blah, 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 interviewed, widely quoted. And he said that what he really wants us to do as a country is invest heavily in prisons. That is his intervention. Yes. And like I said, wow. he is well paid. He leads a major think tank, publishes papers that then, trickle down or trickle up, I guess, into the political discourse. And he said it so easily, so smoothly. This stuff is bad.
Yeah.
Bad.
It is. And yet, again, because there's not a media platform ecosystem, there's not a communications, understanding. And then there's no appreciation for, the psychology or the, and I don't want to use the word spirituality, but in some sense you could say, just the emotional well-being that people are feeling. And it is a paradox because, like, Republicans basically declared war on reality beginning in about the 1950s with William F. Buckley and these, reactionary figures who came in and took over the party. Like, the problem with trying to defend reality is when you've got when you've got a system that does suck for a lot of people, and people are hurting, they're unemployed, they're, they don't have friendships, they don't have relationships, they don't have things that they want and should have as humans. And we can't turn around and say, oh, everything's fine.
One of the things that I learned specifically making the movie Divide was how unions were such a central part of telling the story. So many folks used to belong to unions, and this is where labor history was taught and passed down, and these ideas of solidarity and these ideas of, like, this solidarity is the only way out. Like, this is how we build movements. This is how we win against the wealthy elites. And that story, labor history in the United States, which is so robust and amazing, it's not taught in schools, right? So it was the one place where it was. And then also in the military, right? In terms of diversity, not in terms of solidarity. Well, yeah, I guess it's a separate type of solidarity kind of message, but that diversity is our strength, and like coming together, like, these are very important institutions for telling the story of how we make everything better for the majority of people. And we don't have that now because the right has exploded it. The Thatcher's "there is no society," like and Reagan and all of that stuff. So I think that's also a part of, we're talking about media ecosystem. I think that's also a very important part to discuss. And I think that's also one of the reasons why higher ed is under such immense pressure right now, because it's one of the last places where even any kind of story is being told about that, even though that's not what the main story is.
The value that unions did provide to a lot of people who were never going to get formal education, and even to ones who did, a lot of colleges, I never heard of colleges that have a requirement to learn about these things.
But you could stumble upon it, right?
But you might, you might at least see some of it. But even unions, as they became more beleaguered and under attack by the government from Republicans and also some Democrats as well, we have to say that, that they focused all of their resources purely on survival and not enough on trying to expand. Because if you can't bring in new members, then you're not going to, whatever is happening to you on the economic side, you won't have any hope of getting new organizations, new businesses to unionize. Like, you have to spend on this, and they stopped to a large degree. And but I mean, ultimately, like what you were saying, the idea of solidarity, like that is the message that has to be understood, and it's the only full spectrum critique and response to capitalism in a way that is empowering of everyone. Because I mean, ultimately, and it's such a simple strategy when you think about it. Divide and conquer really is all that they're doing.
Very effective.
But it's very effective. Yeah. And I mean, the idea, and you talked about it in the film also, like with the mining companies, like how they used divide and conquer with specific demographic groups.
They did it very specifically, very knowingly. So it's called the judicious mixture. So they would recruit miners directly off of Ellis Island, people who did not speak English. And so They wanted a third of their workforce, people who were immigrants who did not speak English. They wanted a third of their workforce in this particular area to be Black Americans who are coming up from the South. West Virginia was a free state, and so could potentially, like in one's imagination, offer a little bit of a little marginally more security than some of the places in the Jim Crow South. But whether that was true or not, debatable. And then they also wanted a third of their workforce to be what they called native whites, so people from the mountains. And they thought that inherent mixture, that third, would never allow for organizing to happen, right? You have people who have vastly, not only different contexts, but also different needs and different stakes. And they thought like this would make enough conflict that they wouldn't be able to organize. But the stakes were so high, everything was so horrible that people were dying left and right, that they were able to organize a union. And, John Sayles describes some of this in the film Matewan. That happened in a neighboring county to McDowell County. And like you said, these are very simple kinds of things. But when, after the election, I'm going on to Twitter or I'm watching TV news or whatever, and people are saying, F around and find out Latinos, and people are saying, to the uncommitted voters, if I'll be drinking tea while you're getting deported and Schadenfreude is a thing. This is playing, not only is that Trumpist, but it's also playing into this divide idea. I really wish, if I had a wand and I could wave it around, I would want middle class liberals to understand that they are part of a third of people, right? That they have choices here. And othering people who maybe we have very different ideas about what an egalitarian society would look like, but othering people like that is playing directly into the hands of our overlords, to put it in an exaggerated way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also, it is absolutely is doing that.
Yes.
And you're making the job easier for them because, the goal is to pit people against each other. So and it's so hilarious because they often try to say that the Democrats engage in identity politics, quote unquote. But the reality is that is exactly what they do. Their entire operations are based on identity and getting people to elevate, so whatever identity that they are in favor of. So they offer to Black Americans, they tell them, well, you actually are a Christian more. That's what you really identify as, and you should accept our identity of Christian. We're the Christian Nationalist Party. So if you're a Christian, you should go along with this. And so they just offer different facets of their identity politics to people. And and the idea of solidarity and intersectionality, those have got to be the only, are the only ways that we can get around these things, because our differences will always be there, but they aren't all that we are. And I think that's the message that I think a lot of people have struggled to get.
Yes.
And the right wants you to struggle with that. They want you to think that, that you're better than somebody else who thinks
And good Lord,
differently.
have I encountered so many liberals who think that they are, right? Better than the people that I came from. and the whole idea of flyover country, like all of this, it's absolutely like you are playing into the broader tool to disenfranchise yourself when you do that. And the other day I was talking to someone, and they said that the reason why, actually it happened twice, that the reason why Harris lost was because she's a woman or a Black woman. And okay, that is a reason. It is not the reason, right? And that is a very important distinction, I think.
It is. Yeah, and like, if that's going to be all the analysis that you're going to do,
right, exactly,
then nothing is possible, because these are thought-terminating cliches, actually, is what they are. Like, this is the system that we have. You're not going to magically get another one. So you have to learn how to operate within it. Like I would hear people complain about the Electoral College, and look, and it is unfair. It's not fair to the vast majority of America that basically only the people in 7 states, their votes really are the only ones who matter. That sucks, and it's not fair, but this is how it is. And the only way that changes is if you use the system to change the system. And like that ultimately is, what the institutional and organizational power of Republicans is based on.
Yeah.
They knew what the rules were, and they organized their ideas around them. And, Democrats, I think, the public supports left-wing ideas more than right-wing ideas, but that doesn't mean you don't have to do the work. That doesn't mean that you don't have to talk to them. That doesn't mean that you don't have to create media for them. That doesn't mean that you're going to not bother educating them. Like, these things, politics is the art of the possible, but you make things possible. You can't wave a magic wand and say, "Oh, look, we got better policies. Yes. You should vote for us. Otherwise, you're a dumb moron."
And one of the reasons, but not the reason, Spain became a fascist dictatorship for 40-ish years, depending on when you want to put the end of Francoism, is internecine fights. People couldn't get it together to create a popular front, and they tried to at first, and they couldn't. And like I said, it's not the reason, it's just one very important one. And when Franco won, a huge portion of the population was in civilians were in concentration camps. People were being tortured and murdered, and it was an utter disaster. So don't you think that it would have been better for the communists and anarchists to get along? In terms of that, and those stakes again are very, very different than what we're facing right now. But I'm just saying, why can't we figure this out here? And it's going to take the elites to figure it out.
Well, yeah,
the working class already understands this.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why so many of them voted for Trump, because they were like, okay, he seems to be at least blowing things up. So blowing things up is a better option than status quo. And telling everybody the status quo is fine.
Yeah.
And then asking, I don't get it. Saying, I don't get, this is not.
Yeah. Creating a system where the only people who can get a good job are people with postgraduate degrees. And then tell people, hey, that's just how it is. It's a great system. and you don't want them to be upset about that? You have another thing coming. So we're coming up on the hour here, so and you got a hard out here. So, but there is one thing, hopeful thing actually for the future, which I think is great to end on here. So, tell me what you mean by that.
You know, there's a phrase in Spanish in a political sense: "Seguimos adelante." We continue forward. Right. And that I think is a particularly important message that we need to take right now, because things feel pretty bleak, and it's not like no pasarán and like si se puede. Like those phrases aren't for us right now. But it is essential that we understand, we look back to the history of movements for justice and liberation, and see how many times folks have won in almost miraculous circumstances. Like in Spain, it was a miraculous thing that they got a democracy. And it's very, very important that we seguir adelante. We need to do that, no matter what, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's easy to think it's, that the world is ending and everything is horrible and everything is awful. But that's, having that mentality is the way to make sure that that happens.
We need to stand firmly and understand. And, I say this to people sometimes, and people are like, look at me like glassy-eyed, like, what are you talking about? But it is actually a thing. Like how we were talking about a third, people participating in their own divide and conquer. You also participate in your own political demise when you have no hope. So it is very, very much. Yeah. I'm very pessimistic, so I'm not saying, but I am going to be marching forwards, and it's going to be these next 4 years are going to be very challenging. To put it mildly, for some more than others. And it's just going to be incredibly important to steel ourselves, particularly in the next, month and a half or whatever. We need to really be thinking about that, I think.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. The goal is to make people feel bad and to withdraw and to give up. And that is the one thing you can do the most.
And that is a very personal thing. Like that's not about calling people or writing postcards or whatever. That is something that you literally can do.
Yeah. That is absolutely right. Yeah. All right. Well, so Maura, for people who want to keep up with your things on social media or the internet,
well,
what are your recommendations?
So my film, very short, 21-minute, dividethemovie.com. Yes, and I have a film also called Uncensored about journalists experiencing violence in Colombia. And then I have a film about Spain's transition to democracy, but that's in progress. So I have a mailing list. So people, like you said, you're going to sign up, you're going to have a link, so I can put a link in so people can, if they're interested in hearing about that.
Well, it's been a great conversation, and we will keep having this conversation in the months to come. I hope so. Yeah. All right. So that is the program for today. I appreciate everybody joining us for the discussion, and you can always get more if you go to theoryofchange.show. You can get the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And if you are a paid subscribing member, thank you very much for your support. You can support the show on Patreon or on Substack. We have links on both places, and my appreciation is very deep for everybody who is supporting us in that way. And if you can't afford to support financially, please tell your friends. Please please tell your favorite podcast host or your favorite journalist that you may know on social media. Let them know what I'm doing here. I'd love to talk to them. I'm always interested in new guests or being on somebody else's show. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.